In the small, quaint village of Eldridge, there lived an old lady named Margaret. She had spent her entire life in the same weathered, cozy cottage that had been passed down through her family for generations. The garden behind her house was her sanctuary, filled with blooming flowers and fragrant herbs. One sunny afternoon, while tending to her garden, Margaret decided to dig up a new plot for planting tulips. With a spade in hand, Margaret began to dig. The earth was soft and cool beneath her fingers as she worked her way deeper into the ground. After a few minutes, the spade struck something hard. Curiosity piqued, Margaret cleared away the soil to reveal the corner of an old, iron chest. It was rusty and covered in moss, but it was intact. She wrestled it from the ground and set it on the grass, brushing off the dirt. The chest was heavy and locked, but Margaret's determination was stronger. She fetched a hammer and chisel from her shed, and after a few minutes of prying and banging, the lock finally gave way. The lid creaked open, and inside, she found a pile of old, yellowing photographs. The edges were worn, and they had a musty smell, as if they had been hidden away for centuries. Margaret picked up the first photograph and held it to the light. It was a portrait of a stern-looking man dressed in Victorian attire. But something was disturbingly odd. The man was missing his left eye. She shuffled through the other photographs, and her unease grew. Every single person in the photos, men, women, and children alike, were all missing their left eye. A chill ran down her spine. She brought the chest inside and spread the photographs out on her dining table. There were dozens of them, spanning different eras. Margaret recognized some of the faces from old family albums, but the missing eyes were a grotesque anomaly. She wondered if this was some sort of macabre joke or if there was a darker history to her family that she had never known. Determined to uncover the truth, Margaret decided to visit the local historical society. She packed the photographs into a box and headed into town. The historical society was housed in an old, stately building near the town square. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books and polished wood. Margaret approached the front desk, where a kindly librarian named Mrs. Havers greeted her. Margaret explained her discovery and showed Mrs. Havers the photographs. The librarian's eyes widened with recognition and horror. "These are the Larkins," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your ancestors. There's an old legend about them, but I never thought it was true." Margaret pressed for more information, and Mrs. Havers led her to a dusty old bookcase filled with local histories and folklore. Mrs. Havers pulled out an ancient tome and flipped through its pages. She stopped at a chapter titled, "The Curse of the Larkins." According to the legend, the Larkin family was cursed by a vengeful witch in the 17th century. The witch had been wronged by Margaret's great-great-great-grandfather, and in her dying breath, she cursed him and his descendants. The curse took their left eyes as a mark of their sins. Margaret listened in stunned silence. She had always thought the stories of witches and curses were mere superstition, but the photographs seemed to tell a different tale. Mrs. Havers suggested that Margaret speak to Father O'Malley, the local priest, who was known for his knowledge of the occult and the supernatural. With a heavy heart, Margaret thanked Mrs. Havers and made her way to the church. The church was a tall, imposing structure with stained glass windows that depicted scenes from the Bible. Inside, the air was cool and still. Father O'Malley was a middle-aged man with a kind face and piercing blue eyes. He listened intently as Margaret recounted her discovery and the legend of the Larkin curse. He took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "This is indeed a grave matter," Father O'Malley said. "The curse of the Larkins is one of the darkest tales in our village's history. If the photographs are real, it means the curse still lingers." He explained that breaking such a curse would require a deep understanding of the occult and possibly a ritual of purification. He promised to help Margaret but warned her that the journey would not be easy. Margaret returned home, feeling a mix of fear and determination. That night, she couldn't sleep. The faces in the photographs haunted her dreams, their empty eye sockets staring into her soul. She awoke with a start, feeling a presence in her room. The air was thick with a cold, oppressive energy. She reached for her bedside lamp, but it flickered and went out. In the dim light, Margaret saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was a woman, dressed in tattered clothes, her face hidden in darkness. But Margaret could see the hollow socket where her left eye should have been. The figure raised a skeletal hand and pointed at Margaret. A voice, barely a whisper, echoed through the room. "The curse must be lifted, before it consumes you." Margaret screamed and the figure vanished. She sat up, trembling, and reached for the photographs. She had to find a way to end the curse before it was too late. The next morning, she returned to the church and told Father O'Malley about her vision. He believed it was a warning and suggested they begin the ritual of purification as soon as possible. The ritual required several rare ingredients and a sacred text that was kept in the church's archives. Father O'Malley and Margaret spent days gathering what they needed. They prepared a circle of protection in the church's basement, using chalk and candles. The air was thick with incense as Father O'Malley chanted ancient prayers, calling upon divine forces to break the curse. Margaret stood in the center of the circle, clutching the photographs. As the ritual progressed, she felt a strange sensation, as if a heavy weight was lifting from her chest. The candles flickered, and the air grew colder. Suddenly, a violent gust of wind swept through the basement, extinguishing the candles and plunging them into darkness. In the pitch-black room, Margaret could hear whispering voices, angry and mournful. She felt a cold hand brush against her cheek, and then a blinding light filled the room. When her vision cleared, she saw the ghostly figures of her ancestors standing around her, each missing their left eye. They looked at her with a mixture of sadness and hope. Father O'Malley continued to chant, his voice rising above the whispers. The figures began to fade, and Margaret felt a warm light envelop her. She closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. When she opened her eyes again, the basement was silent and the figures were gone. The photographs in her hands had changed. The eyes were no longer missing. Father O'Malley smiled, his face weary but relieved. "The curse is lifted," he said. Margaret felt tears of joy and relief stream down her face. She thanked Father O'Malley and returned home, carrying the photographs with her. The oppressive energy that had hung over her house was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. In the following weeks, Margaret's life returned to normal. She tended her garden and enjoyed the company of her friends and neighbors. The iron chest remained in her home, a reminder of the dark history she had uncovered and overcome. She knew that the curse of the Larkins was finally laid to rest, and her ancestors could now find peace. And so, the old lady continued to live in her cozy cottage, surrounded by the beauty of her garden and the love of her family, free from the shadows of the past. Dear viewers, if you like to watch the scariest horror stories, do subscribe, like and share our channel. Thank you.